LeSean, we can't have you in here and not talk about making anime. Like, that is such a unique thing that, like, we don't really get to hear about that much, right? And so...
You finishing the question?
No, yeah. I'm just so excited. I'm just really excited to hear about it. Like, and everyone was too. They're like, oh my gosh, it's like such a unique thing to get to do.
You know, I mean, I got my start working in the East with Korea. You know, when I lived in Korea for 3 years. You know, Korea, they are primarily a subcontracting hub for Japan and the United States. You know, Japan sends a lot of their content for in-betweening, and some productions, full productions are done in Korea. It's only, you know, a hop across the pond over there. And I think America's been outsourcing content to South Korea for close to 40 years, so maybe longer. And so for me going to Korea was part of wanting to be closer to Japan in some sort of subconscious way. You know what I mean? Because being able to work in Japan it wasn't difficult because of, I don't think it was difficult to work in Japan because they just didn't want us there. There's this collective they that they don't let foreigners in. The yen was always superior to the dollar. That's a big part that no one really talks about. You know, you're paying double for a half-hour TV show back then. You know, it's like $2 to the one. You know, and it's very expensive to produce animated TV shows in general. I mean, we've paid studios like TMS, you know, to do Batman the Animated Series, but that's a Batman franchise. You know,
they've got money.
Yeah, you know. So for me, Korea has always been a go-to spot because the won is cheaper than the dollar. So it makes most sense for them to send a lot of their content over there. So me going to Korea was sort of like, how can I get closer to the animation production process? And also, if I'm lucky, I can work with some talent who's worked on some projects in Japan, you know? So for me, the novelty of being a Westerner working in the East was more about getting the experience, not necessarily saying, hey, I'm making anime. That's more along the living the dream thing that's floating around online. And it's like, I think it's more than that. So for me, the experience of doing that, having the experience of working abroad in South Korea, in Seoul for so long, by the time I started collaborating with studios like Satellite, I was already prepared to, you know, work abroad. So I don't, it's more about having the opportunity to work with a studio that I'm a fan of their output, you know, than less about me being a foreigner working in Japan, you know. So it's like, if I have a chance to work with Thomas Romain, who did Oban Star Racers, that's awesome. I can come to him as a creative. Just in terms of like, what does it mean to be a Western creator in the anime industry? I still don't know. I'm still trying to figure that out. You know what I mean? I think for me, it's always been about the process and less about the novelty of it, if that makes any sense. You know? So,
I have a question, if it's okay. I feel like a big barrier that many people who live in the United States would have to go to work in another country like Japan or Korea is obviously the language barrier. Did you know Korean before moving?
I did not know Korean. And
how was that?
And the blessing that I had working at a studio like JM Animation. JM Animation was the studio that I went to directly when I left the United States. And they have a history of working on many shows like a lot of the Warner Brothers direct-to-video shows. They did a few episodes of The Boondocks on season 2, and they actually did the animation for season 3 before branching off to form Studio Mir and work on Korra. Much of the team who worked on season 3 of Boondocks went over to form Mir and start Korra. And the cool thing about working with Koreans is that we've been working with them for so long. It's mandatory for them to have several staffers who speak English because they have to translate the scripts. They have to, you know, bring translators abroad with them and stuff like that. So I learned the very basics of Korean to get by in order to do what I needed to do. And you do have to learn that language. My Japanese is not great. My Korean is better than my Japanese. And I think the segue of me being able to work in Japan, for example, is because of my relationship with a studio like Satellite, where Michiaki Sato-san is very, very international minded. He has a core group of French artists working in-house at Satellite who also speak English, you know. So it's a lot. It's less difficult than you think. Now, if I want to become a citizen in Japan, working in the anime industry, that's a completely different different issue.
Right.
Right.
Being a citizen in Japan is incredibly difficult, and I'm not entirely sure I'm built for that. You know what I mean? It's hard being an American. You know what I'm saying? So, but the language barrier is a challenge if you don't know why you're going over there. You know,
Right.
and I think because I interjected myself into a system that historically has an English culture, it was a little bit easier for me to, you know what I mean, to make the transition into production. And I was lucky that Jung Mi, the president of JM Animation, was very, very curious about me being in-house because she wanted to know what I knew about the Hollywood system so that they can pitch shows in Hollywood. So there was a sort of
Win-win.
mutual, there was a sort of mutual self-interest there. You know, she was impressed that I was willing to leave the United States to work in Korea, because most people who work in animation, who work in Korea, are usually financed by the studios to live there. They don't just go there and become staffers. You know, it's hard. The Korean government will question, well, why would we bring you here when we can just bring a kid out of our Korean university to do your job? What's so special about you, you know?
Right.
So there's a lot of bureaucracy behind that, but I definitely think the English, you know, culture that's so prevalent in Korean culture played a big part in my ability to have a smoother transition, you know, there. So, in answer to your question, no, the English, my Korean was not that great when I moved out there, but there's ways to make it work. And to be honest, you know, I've made attempts to be vocal about my experience in South Korea. I've done a couple of online videos and sharing my experiences over there, and I've inspired quite a few kids who, and some of them which have already made transitions themselves to go to Korea and work in those studios. So, it's not the brightest way to do what you need to do in terms of animation experience, but there are a lot of kids graduating universities who want to work on these shows that they love, Legend of Korra, anime, and we're just not producing those types of shows here domestically.
Right.
That's going to welcome all of those kids who are into anime once they graduate college to provide them with jobs to work in that style. Most of the times, by the time they graduate college, that style is beaten out of them because if you're not drawing like Cal Arts over here, you know, chances are it's going to be difficult for you to get work in TV animation production unless it's game design or feature or concept development.
Right.
That kind of
like
realistic style.
There's like one style that's really prevalent in at least the United States, which is disappointing just because kind of going back to it, like there's so much you can do with animation.
Well, yeah, there is. But, you know, to be fair, the East Coast is like that too, right? Like Cal Arts and Art Center is to California the way RISD and School of Visual Arts is to the East Coast in New York City. Like, it's all a truncated system where everyone's signed up circulating talent. These studios are going to these schools and handpicking talent, and they're looking for specific things, you know. So it's the same way in Japan, it's the same way in France, you know what I mean? It's all regional. So, but I do echo the sentiment that, you know, that it would be nice to see more of that stuff. But I think globalization is changing that, and I think over the years there'll be easier opportunities for kids coming out of school to go abroad if the studios are willing to have them. So.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah.
I know a Korean studio does Steven Universe, and there is actually a really cute, like very, like the characters actually went to the studio where it's being animated in the most recent episode, one of the most recent ones. Yeah, and it was just like really cute to see them acknowledge that and like how that's obviously a big part of animation.
Yeah,
now.
I mean, there's definitely the producers and directors now that are in positions of power to create content that are in their 30s and mid-30s and even 40s are children of anime. And now they're in these positions of power, and they know who Satoshi Kon is. They know who Makoto Shinkai is. I didn't know who he was.
Were you a child of anime? Did you grow up watching?
Yes. My first exposure. I was watching anime before I knew what it was, right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Everyone
has it, right? I didn't know what the label was, but I knew it wasn't Bugs Bunny. You know, people were getting killed and dying, and they had deep emotions, and they had arcs, and you know, I wasn't used to that, so that's why I was really attracted to it. But yeah, you know, in answer to that, like, I definitely think there is an opportunity for more kids to have access to making the kind of stuff they want, if the market is in the position it needs to be to give them a platform to do that stuff. So